Welcome. Again, my name is Laurel Mildred with the California Foundation for Independent Living Centers and our project Californians for Olmsted. We're here today where people are still gathering to present the second installment of our Olmsted training series. We've called it There's No Place Like Home, and it's about the HUD Home Investment Partnership. We're extremely honored to have Steve Gold as our content expert and presenter today. Training is brought to you by the California Foundation for Independent Living Centers. Next slide, please. Steve Gold is our presenter. Alan Friedman, our technology manager, is moderating today. And my name is Laurel Mildred. I'll be trying to interact with you in the chat box if I can walk and chew gum at the same time. Steve Gold is an attorney who specializes in civil rights. He represents only people with disabilities. He's also, besides representing individuals in discrimination lawsuits, he's represented ADAPT, Not Dead Yet, and other national and local disability organizations. Actually, many of you already know Steve well. You know his work. You know him personally. He's a leader and recognized advocate for many years. He's been recognized as the godfather of the Olmsted Supreme Court decision. He's the first one who constructed the legal theory under the Americans with Disabilities Act that unnecessary institutionalization is discrimination. He wrote the amicus brief for ADAPT, NCIL, TASH, in the Olmsted case that was argued before the Supreme Court. And because of that legal theory that Steve advanced, the court followed the legal principle, and consequently the most integrated setting is now the law of the land. So there's lots more to say. Take a look at Steve's full biography. But meanwhile, I would just like to welcome him to our webinar, and I'm going to turn it over to him to talk about the HUD Home Investment Partnership.
Thank you. Thank you, Laura. I'm really excited about this webinar with California. You guys are one of the two big ones, and if we can get California and New York or New York to hook on, we may be able to get other states. The purpose of the webinar today, well, before we go to that, what I'm going to talk about there's a mutuality of interest between you, the advocates, and also on the phone, which I'm absolutely ecstatic and delighted about, long-term care state administrators for either MFP or Medicaid, waivers, et cetera. It doesn't matter. Both the advocates and the administrators want to get people out of nursing homes. And
Steve?
A big barrier has been, yes.
Steve, I'm not hearing you terribly well, and I have my sound turned up all the way.
Okay, I will talk louder.
Perfect.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. The mutuality of interest is that both the advocates and the administrators have, in the last few years, faced the problem of affordability in housing. And this past year, after the mainstream vouchers category 2, I know there were people in California very depressed that so few went to California. Okay, the big picture today, well, I'm going to try to present to you what the goal is. I think we can convince California that they can save general revenue funds through that they normally would spend on people in nursing homes by using other federal funds to provide tenant-based rental assistance, also known as vouchers. That's the big picture. How do we convince the state that it is really in their interest to save save state funds by using other federal funds? Okay, let's go on to slide number 3. One of the problems, we know there are lots of people in nursing homes who want to get out. And in a number of states, it has been made absolutely explicit that the barrier is affordability in housing. And the question now is, where do we find it? where and how can we access it and convince the people who are basically responsible for it to use the federal money that we're going to be talking about. I'm going to frequently talk about your governor, and I'll tell you why in a minute, and as well as your California Department of Housing and Community Development. Those are the two officials or departments that really have to be convinced. Okay. On slide number 4, please, Alan. This is not something you're going to get done in a snap. It's going to take real advocacy on both parts. Frequently, the state administrators cannot do the kind of advocacy that the independent living centers can do, and that's the reason I started off by talking about a mutuality of interest. Okay, let's go to number 5, please. One of the things that's happened is that nursing homes really have become the 21st century poorhouses. When you have people in nursing homes solely because they cannot afford housing, that's exactly like the poorhouses were in the 18th and 19th centuries. We don't like to think about it that way, but that's what it is. The critical thing here is I want you to think about the rest of this as two pockets in a pair of pants, right? The first pocket is the state Medicaid program, the Medi-Cal waivers. You can also, and I'm going to, though I didn't do it part of the slide, it clearly your in-house supportive services program should be looked at as well. As part of, when I say Medicaid program, it's not just a waiver, it's also your IHSS. That's pocket number 1. Second pocket is the California Housing Program. And the entity that we're going to focus on today, though not exclusively, is the California Department of Housing and Community Development. It's only the governor who basically wears both legs in the pants. That is to say, Medicaid and the housing people are two separate legs. And what we're going to be talking about is how do you make the argument, how do you convince the governor's office, that he can say that they can save state funds by getting people out of nursing homes with the Home Investment Partnership Program. Okay. Number 6, please, Alan. At the end of this slide, you're going to see there are several web addresses so that you can next year know exactly where to go to get it. There's also literally 3 pages of that list various locales that are participating jurisdictions beyond the California Department of Housing and Community Development. Okay. Let's now start looking at the pair of pants. Slide 7. The Home Investment Partnership is a HUD-funded program. Most of us as advocates in this area when we think about housing, we think about public housing, we think about Section 8 vouchers. Those aren't the 2 largest programs anymore. The 2 largest, in the last 10 to 12, 15 years, the 2 programs that have grown the most in housing, one of them is the Home Investment Partnership Program. The other, believe it or not, is not even a HUD program. It's the Low-Income Housing Tax Credits. When you look at the amounts of money and the number of units built, those are the 2 programs. So when you're thinking about affordable housing in California, you've got to think about the Home Investment Partnership, and that's the one we're going to look at today. And the entity that administers statewide is your California Department of Housing and Community Development. And that's what we're going to call the left-hand pocket. Next slide, Alan, please. Most of us, we really have looked. I mean, when we did the mainstream vouchers, we were working with our housing authorities and requesting them to apply. And I followed California pretty well. I know some of the frustrations. I know also some of the successes that you guys have had. The housing authorities have nothing to do with the Home Investment Partnership Program. What we're going to be talking about today has unfortunately nothing to do with your public housing authorities. It's a totally different entity that unfortunately, we're going to, well, in one sense it's fortunate because it's one entity. It's not, 200 housing authorities in California, whatever the number is. Now, the problem, another variant of the problem is that the Medicaid people, and this is not just California, this is all over the country, and everything I'm saying today is absolutely applicable in almost every state. Both the state housing people and the state Medicaid officials probably don't even know each other exists, don't even know, how they can help each other. And that's why when you think about this as the metaphor of the pair of pants, you want to know who's going to put who's wearing the pants. What one entity is wearing both legs? And it is the governor's office. Okay, next please, Alan. Now we're going to get into the program. How does it work? The HOME program. And it's not an acronym for anything. It's called the Home Investment Partnership Program. It's a block grant funded by Congress, fiscal year 2010, $1.8 billion. The 2011 data is available now, and one of the web addresses at the end, you'll see 10. If you just make it 11, you'll get the total figure. The amount every year, and you've gotten it every year since 1992, California. The amount you've gotten depends. It's a formula. It's based on the various factors: relative poverty rate, number of poor families, rental housing, age of housing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The California Department of Housing and Community Development is the state participating jurisdiction. That's the term of art Congress uses. It is not a public housing authority. It is a separate entity, totally different. Receives money from HUD, totally different stream. There are, in fact, besides the California Department of Housing and Community Development, 94 other participating jurisdictions in California. And if you look in the last 3 pages of this material, you'll see listed every single one. Don't do it now. Do it later. And you'll hear in a few minutes why, how you might be able to use those others. But I'm really convinced if we focus on this one, the California Department of Housing and Community Development, we can get money to get people out of nursing homes. Okay, next one, please. This is 3 fiscal years, just home money. The last fiscal year, obviously there was a dip between 2010, 2011. 2010, you got $62,400,000 for the California Department of Housing and Community Development. The rest of the state got, the other 94 participating jurisdictions got $262 million. In 2011, it slipped. It went to $54 million dollars that we're going to be talking about today. Okay, let's look at the next slide. Why do I look at the home money, the Home Investment Partnership? Even though technically there is a 75-25 match of federal versus non-federal, most participating jurisdictions, match their share with other than money, other than cash. They do it by labor, they do it by property, they do it bond financing proceeds. So in effect, this is 100% federal money. Really critical. So that when we talk about going to the office of the governor to convince the office of the governor to get to the California Housing Department of Housing and Community Development, This is money. This is a program that basically California gets for nothing. That $54 million they basically get for nothing. Next, please. Okay. Home money, how it is allocated, whether it be the California Department of Housing and Community Development or your local participating jurisdictions. The 3 pages at the end of this that list the other 94 participating jurisdictions that receive money. And you will be able, if you go on the web, we gave you the web address, and you go on and you look at something called for the dashboard, you will be able to see exactly how much money your local participating jurisdiction has received. Okay. Home money can only be used for 4 things, and that's really critical. Unlike the Community Development Block Grant Program, unlike housing authority programs, etc., this program can only be used for the following 4 things. How much is allocated is totally discretionary. So another way of thinking of discretion is to say, you know, if one of you guys on the phone were the governor and you wanted to get people out of nursing homes, you could use this money. You have the discretion, the total legal authority to do it. Here are the 4 programs that can be used. 1, home buyer assistance, i.e. mortgage subsidies. 2, this hand should come down, thank you. Homeowner rehabilitation, that as long as the entire unit is being rehabbed up to the applicable rehabilitation standards. Yes, homeowner rehabilitation can be used to make housing accessible if it's part of an entire unit being made rehabilitated. 3, rental development. This is basically building or rehabilitating new rental units or existing units. And 4, thank you, tenant-based rental assistance, TBRA. This is exactly like vouchers. It is just a different term, it operates exactly like Section 8 administered by the housing authorities, even though this is not. And this is our focus. So the question is, most places under their Section 8 voucher program have long waiting lists for people. This doesn't. There's no waiting list. Every year you get money. If you remember in the chart where we showed you fiscal year 2010, 2011, how that money is allocated is totally discretionary, and every year they make that decision. So you could basically, you know, if you can convince the participating jurisdiction to use the money for vouchers, i.e. tenant-based rental assistance, and specifically to get people out of nursing home vouchers, they can do it any year they want to. Next, please. Who is eligible for tenant-based rental assistance? Only very low and low-income families. Now, the bottom thing, the important point to remember is people on SSI in nursing homes or in ICFs or in mental institutions. And I know there are people on here who are, you know, from different institutions. I'm going to keep saying nursing homes. I mean any institution. And it is totally applicable any way you want it in all the institutions. If you're on SSI, you're approximately at 18% of your state's median income. So clearly everyone on SSI, everyone, meets the very low eligibility criteria of tenant-based rental assistance. The state with tenant-based rental assistance must use 90% of the family's income. You know, they got to focus on the poorest people. Okay, next, please. Now, what are the requirements that, in terms of how you can use the tenant-based rental assistance? If they can be used for rental assistance, i.e. monthly voucher payments, or they can be used for security deposits, maximum of 2 months. Some of your waivers right now provide for security deposits, provide for utilities, etc. Some of your waivers don't do that. So, I mean, clearly you can use the tenant-based rental assistance for that program. I'm going to be basically talking about monthly voucher payments, because we got to figure out how you can get people out who know that for a period of years they're going to have a rent supplement, a voucher program. Okay, you can legally use preferences for people with disabilities. Now, this is really important under the home program and the tenant-based rental assistance. This is really important. HUD's regulations basically say that generally tenant-based rental assistance can be for people with special needs, but it doesn't require this. You therefore can basically totally target and say the preferences that transition people with disabilities from institutions to the community. This is not prohibited. This is one of the few HUD programs that you can really, really, really target to say, we're going to use this home money to get people out of institutions as rent supplement, as vouchers. Now, one of the myths that exists that many of the housing people have perpetuated is that they say the tenant-based rental assistance is issued for, they say only for 2 years. Not correct. They can be issued for 2 years, but they can be renewed for individuals forever. We're not suggesting that they should be done forever, but yes, they can be used and re-extended. Not too different from Section 8 vouchers. Section 8 vouchers have a 1 year, a one-time life expectancy of 7 years, after which the person has to get it renewed. Many people lived on vouchers for for Section 8 vouchers for numerous times. I think it's good policy, though not required. Good policy is to require that people, if they're going to get these tenant-based rental assistance, that they must apply to their housing authority for Section 8 vouchers. They must get on the waiting list for the Section 8 voucher, so that this doesn't become a forever. And you can basically think about over a period of years using the same tenant-based rental assistance money to get more and more people out. But in terms of, it's at least, you can do it 3 months, 6 months, 2 years, or get them renewed. But if you get people to, if your governor's office can work amicably with your housing authorities to say, we'd like you to open up your Section 8 vouchers to let people who are getting out of institutions to get on the waiting list as a preference, while we're going to get them out for 2 years. If they don't get to the top of your waiting list, we can renew it for another period of time. Okay, let's go to the next voucher, please. Thank you. Critical. There are 2 sources of home money that we're going to discuss. We showed you on the chart the annual allocations, and we're going to do those second. And basically, when we get to the annual allocations, we're going to talk about how do you convince the Office of the Governor to get the California Department of Housing and Community Development to allocate a percent, 10%, 15%, of their annual allocations that they receive to get people out of nursing homes. But there's also uncommitted home funds. This is something totally magical. Okay, uncommitted funds basically are, and when you go on the dashboard, and we're going to use some dashboards in a few minutes, the HUD dashboards, at the beginning of every year when the California Department of Housing and Community Development gets its annual allocations, we talked about they had discretion how to allocate the money. Well, sometimes they talk about rental projects. they're going to expect a rental project to basically come online, and we'll use it for a certain amount of money. But then sometimes the projects fail, and they don't come into fruition. And this becomes uncommitted money that's just basically sitting around. And this is not just the California, and they don't sit around forever, obviously. They can roll over in anything that your participating jurisdiction wants to use it. But if we keep our eyes out and we realize that there's a certain amount of uncommitted money, we should be jumping on it. Okay, next slide, please. Very important. The total, there are 95 participating jurisdictions. And even though each of them theoretically could use their home money to provide tenant-based rental assistance, to assist people to move out of the institutions, there are two that have a financial interest in doing it, theoretically. Before I get to that, those even if your local participating jurisdiction does not have a financial interest, if you guys can get to them and convince them that there are residents in your area who are there in a nursing home solely because they cannot afford rent in the community, they can use their money to get people out. They can use their money as tenant-based rental assistance. I'm going to, though, talk about the state as the participating jurisdiction, because when they use their money to do it, the governor's office can save general revenue funds. And the argument is to them why they should use it is because they can save money. The other 94, they're not going to save, they're not part of the pants. They just would be doing the right thing to do. Okay, so the first one is the California Department of Housing and Community Development. The second is there are local participating jurisdictions that have a county or public nursing home. San Francisco, for example, has Laguna Honda. There are, throughout the country, something like 1,200 county and local public housing. If you have a county nursing home, then your local participating jurisdiction has a financial interest to get them people out of there, because probably your local entity is paying some of its local tax money to operate that nursing home. Okay, the emphasis is the financial interest is saving the state or local general revenues used to support residents in nursing home. And please, next. Every quarter, HUD publishes a dashboard for every PJ participating jurisdiction, both in your state and nationally. Here is the link. You go to it. You'll go to there's a diagram of the country. You go to California, and it's going to list every participating jurisdiction in California. I'm just looking today at the one. Okay, next slide, please. Here is the California dashboard. Every dashboard looks exactly alike. Okay, and the next page I'm going to explain to you how to read it. I'm going to do this twice, right? Because, well, before we go back, please. Thank you. It's important to see that when you go to, this is the California Department of Housing and Community Development dashboard. Okay? You can see, just looking at this, this dashboard is 12/31/10. Probably by now, I did this PowerPoint, 6 weeks, 2 months ago. Probably by now, the March 31st, 2011 dashboard is out. You can see that it's been a participating jurisdiction since 1992. Very important, very, very important. You see that they have received $902 million. It has received $902 million since 1992. As of 12/31/2010, I'm going to repeat all this, guys. I want you to see how to look at how to read the dashboard. They had 5% of this $902 million, about $45 million that was uncommitted on this date at the end of the year. When you go down, you see, is there a way, Alan, to pull this over a little bit? No. Okay. How did California Department of Housing and Community Development use its $900 million, less 5%? Well, you can see this is the last quarter. For whatever reason, nothing was reported. Very unusual. Normally you will see a pie chart in it just like what you see here. This bottom one, the bottom right one, and we're going to go over the whole thing in a minute. You can see that 35% of the money went for rental development. 51% went for home buyer assistance. 13% went for homeowner rehabilitation. We defined those three in one of the previous ones. Only 1,729 households since 1992 from the California Department of Housing and Community Development received tenant-based rental assistance. I am incredibly certain that none of those went to get people out of institutions, which is what our focus is. Just to show you by comparison, Arkansas had more than 4,000. Arkansas uses a lot to get people out of institutions. Okay, next. If you keep that slide in mind, or if you have it in hard copy next to it, this is how to understand every dashboard. The previous slide, 3 boxes. The upper box chart represents the cumulative funding for it. So, as I said, the cumulative funding for the participating jurisdiction of the California Department of Housing and Community Development, $902 million since 1992. It is, in fact, I have it on my hard copy. In fact, the percent of uncommitted funds is also shown in that one. Could I have the next chart, please? And the next slide, please. The second row on the left-hand side shows the last quarter. We saw that from October 1st, we did not increase in reported units. It did, though. It had to have, nope, don't go that one, please. Go back, please, Alan. Thank you. It did have, if you look on the pie chart, 223 households received tenant-based rental assistance in that quarter. Besides this, only 1,729 households receiving tenant-based rental assistance, 16,000, I can see on my hard copy, 589 households received either rental assistance, home buyer assistance, or homeowner rehabilitation since 1992. Okay, now the next chart, please. You got to read that. You got to know how to read these, because whether you're Fresno, Fulton County, Glendale, all of which are participating jurisdictions, every dashboard, the dashboards are HUDs. Every dashboard is the same. You got to see what date you're looking at, effective as. You got to see when they began to become started becoming a participating jurisdiction. How much is the cumulative money for it? Okay, and important to remember that this $902 million does not include any of the money that the other local participating jurisdictions have received. This money is solely the money that the California statewide jurisdiction received. The other thing very important is a myth around. Let me try to dispel it quickly. There's a myth around that the California Department of Housing and Community Development can only use its money in those areas of the state that do not have its own participating jurisdiction. That is not accurate. The California Department of Housing and Community Development can use its money anywhere in the state including where there's another participating jurisdiction. Okay, next, the next slide. Nope, I did that one. I think I went slide 21, please. Oh no, that's fine. Excuse me. Yes, that slide. Okay, I misread before. It was too small on my PowerPoint. I mean on this presentation, but in my hard copy, there wasn't 9% uncommitted money. California had 5%. I misspoke. It had on December 31st, 2011. Mistype, had 9% of the $902 million, or $81 million was uncommitted. That means it had not decided how to use that money. It had not allocated that money. That it could have had the discretion on that date to use that money in 2011 to get people out of nursing homes. Okay. I went over this other stuff with you before. Again, this is how you read it. And next chart, please. This is where it gets sexy, guys. California's statewide PGA could have allocated its uncommitted 81. Remember I told you there are two sources, uncommitted and annual allocation. I'm starting with the uncommitted. Could have used its uncommitted $81 million to transition people out of nursing homes. California can also use, this is the second part, it could allocate a percentage of its annual $54 million to get people out. These are the two slides where you see that. Next one, please. Okay. So now we have just finished with the left leg of the pants. The home money, the tenant base. So now we know this $81 million available would have been available December 31st. And if you go on the dashboard and you get March 31st, 2011, you see how much was available uncommitted at that date. And okay, now we're going to go on the right-hand leg. We're going to look at the Medicaid. And it's from the Medicaid money that you save money. Remember, I emphasized that the home money, the tenant-based rental assistance, home money, basically 100% is federal money. This is not so. Medi-Cal is a 50-50 with feds. So that here you got the state putting up 50% of whatever it's spending, and people both in the institution and in the community. Next one, please. I cannot emphasize this enough. Okay, cannot emphasize this enough. It's only the governor's office who has authority over both the Medi-Cal Department and the California Department of Housing and Community Development. The governor's office wears the pants. He appoints your Secretary of Medi-Cal. He appoints the Secretary of the California Department of Housing and Community Development. Okay. The problem is that neither of these two departments basically have an institutional interest in working together historically. That is to say, the California Department of Community Development, they're going to spend their money on home buyer assistance, on rental development, on whatever, including 1,700 tenant-based rental assistance is not chicken soup, but it's not focused on getting people out. And the Medi-Cal, their interest is not in, it is an interest in getting people out, but they haven't historically worked together. Sometimes, in many states, they don't even know the other exist, and let alone work together. Okay, next. Your governor's office does, yes. Next slide, thank you. This is it. If the governor can save state general revenue, Medi-Cal funding by using federal home funds to move people out, then there will be an interest. That's what I'm trying, that's the one sentence purpose of the entire webinar. Okay, next please. the housing pocket. This is where it gets a little complicated, guys, so bear with me. You have to know, you got to know the math. Unfortunately, there's no way around it. So I'm going to walk it a little slowly through it. Wow, time is flying. Under the home program, the person can only spend 30% of their rental income, their SSI, $845 a month in California, approximately, on housing. So they can only spend $253 if SSI is their only household income. If their household income is SSDI, you got to obviously modify this to again base it on 30% of the household income. Okay. I want to assume that $1,000 is the rent for a one-bedroom in your area. Now, you guys can figure out what the actual is. HUD has a web page that's called Fair Market Rent, FMR. If you Google FMR, you will find what the average rent is for efficiency, one bedroom, two bedroom, etc. Okay, let's assume a one bedroom. Let's assume $1,000 a month is what it would cost for someone to move out of a nursing home and find a one bedroom in Los Angeles. And I think I did go the FMR, and I think that was maybe even increased it a little bit to make it more realistic. $1,000 minus $253 equals $747 a month, or $8,964 a year. That's what the person needs in the voucher. That's what the tenant-based rental assistance must pay for. The person's going to pay $253 a month. The rent is $1,000. They need $747 a month to get out. $8,964 a year rental. Okay, so you got obviously the amount, the tenant-based rental rent supplement changes depending on the rent and where you are. But that's the housing pocket. Now let's look at the Medicaid, the second pocket. The next slide, please. Okay, nope, too fast. Go back. Thank you. The Medicaid pocket. And I'm looking at the Medicaid waiver. But clearly, you guys can use the IHSS. It's the same argument. Okay, it's the same argument. I know, for example, that in 2009, we don't have 2010, but California spent on its personal care option, which you guys call, only in California do you keep using different names than other people in the federal government. IHSS, In-House Supportive Services. It's your personal care. It's under the federal rubric. It's the personal care option. You guys spent $4.4 billion. Huge amount of money, the largest in the country. New York was second. I don't have figures for 2009, but the last figures I have, and I'm sure your administrators on the phone have the 2009 data, probably have the 2010 data. Using the 2007 data from Kaiser, spent about an average of 11,615, had 345,000 people on it. That's amazingly terrific. Okay, I want to show you the steps, but I want you to hear you can substitute clearly the cost in your IHSS. It is a Medicaid program. The 50% applies to it as well as to every waiver. Okay, waiver must demonstrate cost neutrality. That's federal law. That is to say, the waiver services in the community must be less than what the state would otherwise spend in a nursing home or in the mental institution or in the ICF. It doesn't matter. So the difference of what you say is by what you transfer to the community. That's what you save in both the federal and state. To make the argument persuasively, it's necessary to compare what the state's general revenue expenditures are in both the nursing home and then in the community be the waiver. Every waiver has it's called the Appendix J1. This is where I got my information and my figures from. Let's go to the next. I'm going to talk about two separate waivers because this waiver, the multi-purpose senior service waiver, has 16,355 slots. It projects that the expenditures are, the nursing home projected expenditures are 38,158. Now this is important for you to understand that that's a projected, it's not the precise amount. This one, that for 2008, and I don't have the 2010 data, California's Medi-Cal spent $156 per day for people in nursing homes. That's 56,946. Quite a difference than what they projected in its waiver. And this is important when you think about your IHSS, because the savings would be against this figure, and the savings therefore would be even more. And I apologize. I probably, rather than doing two waivers, I should have done the multi-purpose senior and the IHSS. I didn't. I apologize. Okay, so the California Medi-Cal people told CMS that the nursing home expenditure would be, and I think I used the year 5. I don't remember. 38,158, and what you would spend in the community for this waiver, the MSSP waiver, would be $21,157. Okay, those two figures keep in mind. Let's now go to the next slide, please. Okay, what is the total? Not what is the total savings? You subtract what you would pay in the institution, 38,158, or what the state said it would, from what it would pay in the community. So you're talking about a difference of $17,001. Now the next step is the critical one. Okay, this is not a savings for California. This is the total savings for all Medicaid funds, federal and state. The savings for California, because the California medical assistance percentage is 50%, you got to basically take 50% of 17,001, and it's $8,500. That is how much per person you move out of the MSSP waiver you will save for California general revenue for each person. Right? That's how much you spend of your state funds. Save of your state funds. Okay. Now, there's no question, California's savings, even though there was an article in the New York Times yesterday that it wasn't going to be as bad as the governor thought, you're in big trouble. There's no question that your governor's office has to be interested in saving money. Okay. $8,500 per person getting out of nursing homes is what we're talking about in this one waiver. Okay. Let's go to the next waiver. Okay. You also have a waiver called NF Acute Hospital. It's much smaller, 3,200 people. You have 3 levels of cares. I'm only going to use one. Basically, this one, when you go down, you've told you would spend $183,550 for people in either the nursing home or the acute hospital, and one of these 3 levels of cares: NF, AB, and FSA. I'm not sure what they stand for, but your administrators do. Okay, and they've told that this is what you would pay for in the community. Right? The waiver is money you spend for people for services in the community. And it's important for you to know that this and the preceding waiver, when I talk about expenditures, it's both assistance with activities of daily living, it's assistance with IADLs, and it's any hospital and other medical expenses. Right? So the next slide, please. Right? So now what you know is your difference is $80,547. Again, you subtract the 2. 50% of this which is what your state pays, right? That's the state general revenue, is $40,000. So if you're looking at the NF acute hospital waiver, you're talking about much larger savings of money. Okay, next slide, please. 16,355 slots in one, 3,000 slots in the other. Okay, next waiver, please. I'm going to have to, this is taking longer than I expected. Assuming $1,000. Remember, we said on the slide above, to make this thing work, it costs $8,964 a year. You need to give us a rent supplement. Okay, that's the figure. Next slide, please. Okay, so you got uncommitted $81 million. You got annual $54.6 million. Okay, next slide, please. If you assume half the uncommitted money, only half of the $81 million, you know, you could get 4,500 people out of the nursing homes if you had used the uncommitted money. And then you do this by saying $81 million is uncommitted, right? Half of that is $40 million. You divide the $8,964 you need per person into $40 million, and you get 4,500 people. Assuming only a quarter of that money, of the $81 million, which would be uncommitted money, you still talk about 2,031 people could have gotten out during this year. Next slide, please. Okay. I now want to talk about if the 4,500 people were moved into the community using the tenant-based rental assistance. You know, we talked about the $8,900 a year, right? This is how much the state would save in general revenue funds. If 4,500 people, i.e. using only half of that, half of the uncommitted, you multiply 4,518 times $8,500 savings, you can save a total of $38 million with no new federal money, no new general revenue funds. This is saving in general revenue funds. Okay, please, let's go on. I want to now, I'm going to skip this. I'm going to skip that's just of the MSSP waiver. If you look at the slides for the NFAH, you can do the same thing. I want to go to this figure. That's right. Because I want to say, let's assume for a moment that there are no uncommitted funds. That, you know, they heard that you guys were going to come at them, and they figured out they're going to figure out how to get rid of all their uncommitted funds. Okay. What about the annual funds? What about how do you figure out how the 54 million annual funds that they got? Okay. Let's go on to the next slide. So now, the first time you got to convince your governor to allocate a percentage of the annual federal funds to transition people out and therefore save general revenue funds. Let's go to the next slide. How many people could you get out? Okay. If only 5% of the California annual home, and you know, I think you guys should be talking 10, 15%, but just let's be very, very, very gentle and reasonable in year one. If only 5% in the annual home funds were from the State Department were used, you would basically say 50. What did I do? $62.4 million. I hope that is the same figure. That I didn't make a mistake, my math. When you go back to the slide, you see the annual. You multiply 3.1 million. 5%. 5% of the annual allocation is $3.1 million. If you divide 3.1 by 8,900, this is the tenant-based rental assistance money, you could get 348 people out with no new money. Clearly, if You go 10%, you could get 700 people out basically. Right? So all I've done is I multiplied 50% by the annual, by 5%, excuse me, by the annual allocation, and I came up with $3.1 million. If you're in your negotiations with the California Department of Housing and Community Development, you start with 10%, it's a different figure. Okay. But again, you need $8,964 per person, and all you do is divide that into what the amount of money you have, and that's going to be the number of people who can get the tenant-based rental assistance. Next one, please. I think you got to have the governor basically annualize this. I think the first go around probably they'll be a little bit timid. That's why I started with 5%. I think you can put together the governor's office can really be creative. I haven't talked about the low-income housing tax credit, and I know timing is getting a little tight, and I'm talking really quickly. But once you get in the door to the governor and their housing people sit down, there are many ways to combine low-income housing tax credits, home tenant-based rental assistance, housing authority vouchers, and play a whole game to increase it. And you got to be a little creative. What this webinar is basically doing, trying to show you, is that it is absolutely in the governor's interest, the state's interest, to use only federal funds to reduce general funds from the state general funds. And we have the interest in getting people out of institutions. The Medi-Cal people who are running the waivers, who are running the IHSS, they know how to do this. If they had housing vouchers, they know how to get the people out. They know how to increase it, etc. Okay, now, what has to be done? Okay, you just can't magically do your wand. Okay, the last slide, please. In order to pull this off, after the advocates, and one of the things I told the people when we were talking about doing this is that I want a commitment that there's going to be some really follow-up. This is not just a dog and pony show. Isn't it fun to learn about the Home Investment Partnership? Isn't it fun to learn about tenant-based rental assistance, a federal housing program that many people might not have known about? The purpose of the webinar is to get, you're not going to learn it immediately. There are going to be questions. There's going to be some confusion. I understand that, particularly talking the speed I've been talking. But one of the things that's really important, if there's a commitment by the governor's office, and I really think that the statewide advocates on this phone call and the Medi-Cal people who both run the IHSS and who run the various waivers, have an absolute mutuality of interest to work together. Now, I am not so naive to think that an MFP program person can just walk in the governor's office and say, "Gov, I figured out how you can save money." But there sure as heck can be statewide independent living council people and statewide ILCs and ILCs can do that and can have those kind of contacts. But in order for the governor to pull this off, you have to amend the Consolidated Plan. The Consolidated Plan is written by the California Housing Program, the California Department of Housing and Community Development. It's done annually. They can have an emergency amendment. Yes, they have to give notice. Yes, there have to be public announcements, but they can do it. And I think, I really think if your MFP is having trouble getting people out of nursing homes, and if there's an interest in pulling down enhanced federal match for the MFP, if there's an interest in talking about how do you use the IHSS to get some enhanced match through the community first choice, et cetera, you can really talk to the governor about You guys know how to get more federal money in, to use the existing federal money, while at the same time save general state revenues. I would like to stop because I know I talked really quickly, and I know there have to be oodles of questions. I've done this before, this webinar, and I never had the time to answer all the questions. I've been told by Laurel there may be close to 100 people on this phone, on the webinar. Laurel, do you think it's a good idea to stop now?
I think it is a great idea. I'm going to give you a couple questions that came in during the presentation, and then I'm inviting people.
All attendees have been unmuted.
Okay. So, and I'm going to invite people. I'm sorry. Hold on just a moment, please. Okay. So I want to just show you. Please don't talk yet. Okay, so I want to just show you the last couple of resources Steve gave you that you can look at in your own time, but he has a list of all of California's participating jurisdictions here that you can scroll through and find your own nearby jurisdiction. So let me give you a couple of questions that came in. First one, while you take a breath, Steve, was kind of for me. Jennifer Walsh, who's participated in a couple of trainings now, noted that we discourage people from using blanket general cost savings arguments all the time in advocacy, and we're encouraging people to refine them. And I was really pleased to see that question. I want to just briefly say what we were suggesting is that sometimes cost effectiveness is the best argument, and sometimes there are other arguments, and when you use a cost effectiveness argument, you need to be specific and make sure that you kind of have the math and understand it really well, and that you're talking to the actual person who would save money. And so the thing that Steve is raising is he's showing us that formula for proving that to policymakers. And so in this case, this is one of the specific cost effectiveness arguments that's a really strong argument. And I'm going to defer more about that to July, when Steve Kay and I are going to really go into depth into cost effectiveness. So please join us for our July webinar if you want to know more about that topic. So I just wanted to handle that question. And then on the phone, Debbie, Steve had a question for you. And the question, I think you kind of answered it, was early on. She said, have we used up the funding received each year? You might want to repeat your answer there. And then what happens to whatever is left?
The state rolls it over to the next year. The state knows how to spend it. They're not going to give it back to the feds. I promise you. There are probably more home buyer assistance that they could do. There's more rental development. We have to be at the table. I can't, when I do training on housing, I like to say the most important thing for you to remember is all housing is political. In this webinar, I used the term discretion. How the participating jurisdiction allocates its home money is it has 100% discretion, and it is a political decision. If we're at the table, if we can convince the governor that it's in the governor's office, I don't mean, the governor, but it's in the governor's interest to save state general revenues, I promise you the Secretary of the California Department of Housing and Community Development will comply.
Great. And I'm going to ask one more question, then we have a question from Cheryl. Pat Feldman, now I think this is a really good question for you to explain why this strategy might be different, Steve. Pat Feldman asked, are these vouchers available for people living in residential homes such as board and care?
Yes, they are. And that's a great, I don't know who asked the question, but that's a great point. What I don't have in front of me, and which I don't know by memory, is the personal care homes. Many states use a state supplement already for that. And if they do that, the tenant-based rental assistance cannot be used for that. But if you want to get people out of the personal care boarding home into their own apartments, you could. And if the state is using its personal care, its general revenue as a part of the supplement for personal care homes, it is an incredible savings to them.
Great. Someone is talking. I wonder if you could please mute your phone. We're all hearing you. Cheryl, thank you for typing your question, but I'm going to see if you can talk. I'm going to try and give you your microphone, and if that doesn't work, then I'll repeat your question. Whoops, I took it away. I'm turning mine off. I don't think that quite worked. Okay, Cheryl from Grass Valley is asking if a county doesn't have a PJ, are they covered by nearby PJs, or must we resort to only state-level PJ?
Okay. The technical answer to your question is that if you're living in an area that is not a PJ, then the California Department of Housing and Community Development is your PJ. That's the technical answer. But for tenant-based rental assistance, the California Department of Housing and Community Development can use its money anywhere in the state, everywhere in the state, whether you're in a PJ or not. And that's the myth that everyone has perpetuated for years, is to say that, well, you know, if you live in a PJ, go to your PJ for the tenant-based rental assistance. And I think you should try that anyhow. But they don't have a financial interest of getting people out of nursing homes. They don't save money unless they have a county nursing home.
So that's a good example of who you make this kind of an argument to and who you don't.
Right.
Who you make it to,
perfect, yeah.
Who you make it to is the person saving the money. So in this case, the state. Go ahead, Steve. Right. I'm sorry. Talk about
the state's the one that saves the big money.
Right. Cheryl, did that answer your question thoroughly? Hello, Freed? Cheryl, is that you?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes. Did that answer your question? Why don't you talk? We can hear you.
Okay. My question, Steve, is if a PJ isn't in your immediate vicinity, because we don't have any up here, does that account for the do other ones cover your area, or do we have to resort to the state level?
No, the only one that covers your area is the state then.
Okay, thank you.
Great. So we have background noise, so would you please mute your phone? We've just opened the phones now for questions, so it's a little bit more noisy. Really, I can hear somebody talking. Please mute your phone. Thank you. Great. So I'm wondering if you have another question, any other questions for Steve. You're welcome to either raise your hand, you can type it in the chat box, or you can go ahead and speak up now if you have another question. Please go ahead. Okay, Kim. We have a question from Kim. She says, is there any thought to those in the skilled nursing facility who are above the SSI level with a share of cost but want to move out?
I couldn't hear you. I'm sorry. Say it again, please.
I'm sorry. Is there any thought to those in a skilled nursing facility who are above the SSI level with a share of cost but want to move out?
Yeah, the same principle applies.
All attendees have been muted. You can unmute your line by pressing *6.
Am I back
on,
Laura?
Yes, you're back on. Sorry.
Okay, no. The answer is, let's assume someone's getting, I don't know, $800 a month SSDI, right? Or what? I mean, yeah. The level of income is totally irrelevant because it only goes to how much the tenant-based rental assistance would have to supplement. And because there's so many people in nursing homes on the SSI level, it's just easier for discussion's sake to use one figure. But if you go back to the chart that had both the assumed full cost and the assumed 30% of the SSI, if you change that and you said the person, for example, has $1,200 a month, just SSDI. Well, 30% of $1,200 is $400. So that's the most they're supposed to spend according to HUD on their rent and household needs, including utilities. So if the rent is in fact $1,000, so rather you would subtract the $400 from the $1,000, and the person would need $600 a month times 12. Period. That only goes to how much the tenant-based rental assistance value for that person would be. So
Thank
the
you.
answer, I know it's a roundabout way, of course, it doesn't matter what their source of income is.
Great. Thank you, Steve. So Janet Bull from the California Department of Healthcare Services, which is one of the departments, it's the department responsible for Medi-Cal.
I see her question. Okay, Jennifer asked the question, how about people who are in the community but they're at risk of losing their support to stay in the community? Are they eligible? The answer is yes, but there's no, obviously yes, but the state doesn't get a cost savings from those people. The only place you get a cost savings of state general revenue is by getting people out of the nursing home, and therefore saving the 50% difference in what the state spends in the nursing home versus what the state spends in the waiver or in the IHSS. But of course, and your question, Saul, for example, spends a lot of does a lot of its tenant-based rental assistance for people who are in the community and basically have lost supports, i.e., either house or someone dies or whatever, and need a voucher quickly.
Great. And I have a question, Steve. It's interesting to have a national expert with us, and I'm wondering if there are states that you know of that are really moving quickly ahead. I think you mentioned Arkansas was using these funds. Can you talk a little bit about the other states and how they're using this?
Well, no, there are very, very few states that are doing this. Many, when you go to your local participating jurisdiction, you're going to see states and PJs have used tenant-based rental assistance. Sometimes they haven't, but when they've used it, they have not used it targeted and given preference to get people out of the institution. That's the issue that hasn't been done. And what triggered my interest and thinking is that when the mainstream vouchers in Category 2 and Category 1 were released earlier this year, and there was a lot of excitement from the advocates and from some of the state people. You know, it just struck me that, you know, we were talking absolute pittance. You know, 1,000 Category 2 is nothing all over the country. We could do that in one state with using this money. So the answer to your question is there haven't been states that have made this programmatic yet. And one of my goals, and the reason I'm interested in doing these webinars, and there are a number of states now that are requested it, is I just think it's a great sort. The home money is a block grant. It's going to come in. It doesn't depend on special congressional appropriations like the mainstream vouchers. It's there. It's going to be there. It's been there.
Great. Well, you know, we love to be trendsetters here in California, so you've just set us a challenge to really go after these funds and make use of these federal funds to both save the state money and get a lot of people out of nursing homes.
Can I switch gears a teeny bit? Unless there's another question.
Please do. We've got about 5-6 more minutes. Please do.
Let me tell you guys about another source of vouchers that you all know about. And I just literally today got results of a Freedom of Information Act request. There are Section 8 vouchers are returned on a national average of about turnover 9% a year. Assuming California is at the national. You know, if we could get the consolidated plans, your local consolidated plans, your local housing authority one-year plans, to target and preference people to get out of nursing homes and give them a preference, right? There's vouchers there I mean, it's a local. That's a local battle, not a statewide battle. That's a battle that you don't have the hook about saving state general revenue funds that you have here, but they're there.
Terrific. Well, so we've had a couple of East Coast participants, and they're starting to sign off because it must be about 6:30 your time, huh, Steve?
It is.
You've been talking a blue streak for an hour and a half, and we are so incredibly grateful for all you've done for our community and all you've done in terms of helping us understand these difficult policy opportunities and make them clear so we can advocate about them. And you've been a pleasure to work with. And I hope we made it clear. This is complicated. This is something that advocates and administrators have not thought about before. Well,
right?
I want to say, go ahead.
All new ideas. Like all new ideas. Don't be depressed if you don't have your arms around it after an hour and a half.
Right. Well, as a matter of fact, Teresa Favuzzi, our executive director, asked me before this call, that the next thing we're going to do after this is sort of start to break down this information, take in the more complicated parts, and start to strategize about how the CFILC Systems Change Network can start to work with advocates to move this kind of strategy forward. And we'll be hoping to perhaps invite you back, Steve, when we have a little bit of a plan and a strategy, and continue to stay involved with you as we move this strategy forward.
Well, that would be great, but I got to tell you, the rest of the country is looking for California to take the lead.
Okay, well, we have our marching orders. I want to thank everyone so much for participating. I want to thank the Department of Rehabilitation, which provided the grant that allowed us to do this training. And I want to thank Alan Friedman and Teresa Favuzzi, who have been great leaders in making all of this happen. And this will be archived on our website, so please share it with your peers and friends and colleagues. And Steve, a very, very special thank you